Welcome to the Entrepreneur Show. This is your host, Michael Mara. I'm the CEO and founder of Entre, a social network for entrepreneurs, investors, and freelancers. On this show, we interview the top CEOs, venture capitalists, angel investors, and founders. Connect with me and thousands of other like-minded people by signing up for free at joinentre.com or download our mobile app on iOS and Android. Welcome back, everyone. On this episode, I'm interviewing Geoff Cook. Geoff is a serial entrepreneur and currently the CEO and co-founder of the Meet Group, NASDAQ symbol Meet, a social dating and live streaming company. You may have heard of some of their platforms like MeetMe, LOVOO, Tag, Skout, and Growlr. He recently sold the company for $500 million in September of 2020. He started his first company from his Harvard dorm room and sold it for millions of dollars at the age of 24. He sold a second company for $100 million in 2011. He's done a ton of stuff in the entrepreneur space, in the dating space, in the live streaming space. And I'm super excited to dive into this because we talk about a ton of stuff and really get into it on how to acquire companies and how to get acquired as an entrepreneur. So please enjoy this episode. All right, welcome back. Thank you all for tuning in to another episode. Welcome to the show, Geoff.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. We connected on Clubhouse, and there's so many interesting things going on there, and I really enjoyed our conversations on there, and I was super excited to get the chance to do this interview to learn more about your past and have all the entrepreneurs and people listening to learn more about all the companies that you've started and everything. I want to start with, what was it like being at Harvard? And during the time that you were there, it had to be a very exciting moment, and not many people ever get to experience that. And I'm curious what that was like, and starting a company while you were at college, and it had to be super fascinating.
Yeah, so I was at Harvard 1996 to 2000 undergrad. And so, I started the company in 1997. And, so this was obviously 1999, 2000 were the real, .com boom years, but 98 was big too. I definitely saw, the guy across the hallway from me started chipshot.com, which was he was selling golf clubs. I started an editing business, which ended up being relatively substantial, having a few hundred people working there. And what was interesting though, is Harvard at the time had a rule on their books that you cannot run a business out of your dorm room. But the rule, I'm sure, was, 100 or 200 years old. I'm sure it was quite, it was kind of assuming that you were having people coming to your dorm and selling them walnuts or something. And so there was always this question of how much could you be known as starting a dorm room business? And obviously all you needed was an internet connection and a cell phone even then. And so that's what I used, but I wasn't super out about it because they did have this rule and no one knew what they would do about it. But it turned out that this was 99. And so I definitely fed into there was this mania where it was actually interesting to be a dorm room entrepreneur. Like right now it's a cliche, but back then it was interesting. And in my summer off between junior and senior year, I actually worked on the business. Previous 2 summers, I had internships, but I just worked on the business. I actually got a place in Palm Springs with my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and we just worked on the business. And the industry standard was putting out, back then, red herring. We're putting out all these articles about dormroom.coms, and so I submitted this kind of false PR press release that said I was dropping out of Harvard to pursue my startup and just to see what would happen, right? And I got this little blurb in the red herring, this little blurb in the industry standard And then New Jersey, Star Ledger, the number one paper in New Jersey, reached out and said, "Yeah, that's interesting. We'd like to do a big feature." And I said, "Sure, but because of the time consideration, and he had a long cycle time, it was quite clear that I was actually going to be in school before the article ran. So at some point, I said, "Look, I changed my mind." And he said, "Wow, that's even more interesting that people are struggling with these decisions, right?" And so he ran that piece, which led to Wired magazine asking me to write a piece, and would pay me. They said they'd pay me $1 a word. So in March of 2000, I wrote this piece that basically outed myself as a dormroom.com. I was only 3 months from graduation. I figured it wouldn't be too much risk. And basically rode the controversy of the whole Harvard ban against dorm room entrepreneurship. Said it was misguided. It was, at the time, it was basically just free press. And my first angel investor in that company actually read that Wired article and came in through there. So, Harvard was a great place to be. I'm sure it's always a great place to be. It's an intense academic area. It wasn't back then like a ton of people doing startups. I don't know what that's like now, but there were then at least a few.
Yeah, that's so funny. Very interesting story. How that all panned out. Did you go into college, or even, when you were younger, did you think that you wanted to be an entrepreneur, or where did you get that drive to start doing this stuff, or at least get interested in it to see what would happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. If I think back, there was never really a time in childhood that I had considered starting a business. At the time, I was actually thinking, maybe I'd do something in physics, or I was into philosophy. And when I came to Harvard, I took some of the higher level, entry level, but for like physics majors, physics classes, and I realized, wow, I'm potentially not as good at this as I imagined. And I started looking at. I was taking a lot of government courses, reading like Marx and all that stuff. But the idea to start a business really just came out of practical need. I literally needed a side job. And I wasn't going to clean the bathrooms of other Harvard students, or I didn't particularly want to work in the library. And so like none of the student jobs appealed to me at all. So I thought, well, I'll just start tinkering against this website. What do I know how to do? I know how to edit. That summer after freshman year is probably where I got introduced to it, because I was an intern for a guy, James Marciano, who actually built an interesting company. It was small. It was maybe half a dozen people, but it was called R Square, OUR Square. And it was basically a social network for people who went to elite colleges. So it was almost like just 7 years early for being Facebook. And so I kind of worked there, and I thought, well, I could do this. It's not so hard to create a website. And I would learn something along the way. So what is it that I can do? And then once I got into it, then it just became, iterative. Like, okay, how do I grow it from 1x to 3x to 10x, and what's the next business line? And so I wouldn't say I was ever intentional about it until I actually started a business, but then I haven't stopped doing some form of my own business since then.
Yeah, and I want to start talking about when after you got it going. I mean, you've sold 3 companies now. Is that right?
Yeah.
So let's talk. In the first one you did it when you were 24.
So 4 if you count this minor art community that wasn't that significant of an exit, but yeah.
4 fantastic. So in the first one you did at 24.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, walk people through what that might look like. I mean, being 24 years old and, having people come to you saying they want to get, they want to acquire you, and were you looking to sell, or how did that work? And it might be helpful to understand the thought process going into that too for people.
And this will make me seem pretty shallow, but in the Wired article, because I was aiming for over the topness, and it worked. It got a 1,000-word piece to 3,000 words, and they paid $1 a word anyway. But they had originally asked for 1,000. But I had said in that piece I would be a failure if I wasn't a millionaire by 24, right? And at the time, I didn't really say it with any real intention, but I had said it publicly, and so, I kind of had that in mind, that I had better start, looking for that real opportunity for that to play out. And on paper, that was probably true, but I was kind of looking to sell it, and I reached out to. There's probably there's probably only a few players that would have bought it, and one of them. Really, it was just good timing. Like my sense in acquisitions is, like, both sides have to be fairly desperate, right? And so, like, the entrepreneur might frequently be desperate to sell because they can get liquidity and they get to say, okay, I had a success. But the buyer, and that's not always the case. Obviously, there's plenty of entrepreneurs who just want to ride it for the long haul. But the buyer has to feel that way too. And so in this case, the buyer was under pressure from digital goods. This is 2004 or 5. They were under pressure from digital, and they wanted e-commerce, and they had this revenue gap in big company parlance. And so they wanted something, and something probably about my size. So it was just a good match. But I find that that's, even when I sold to companies that are much more higher value, it's the same way, right? Like, if the other side isn't really desperate, right? Like, if they don't really want it, they don't have to be desperate. They have to really want it. The deal doesn't happen, right? And so, like, that's said in different ways. Maybe it's a champion, maybe it's something else, but if somebody inside that org that's well placed doesn't really want it, an acquisition doesn't happen, even if it makes a lot of sense on paper.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And what led you you sold the first company? What led you to want to start another company? Did you just get that entrepreneur bug, and you just got addicted to that? Was it the drive to perform better, make more money? What was the drive to, really keep going and start another company?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's a combination of things. So to some extent, being an entrepreneur, this suits me, right? Like, so like, I like the varied nature of the problems. I like even though sometimes it can be extremely painful, in terms of the whatever might be breaking, at least I'm the one who's responsible for it. And I think that's hard to give up, right? And when you're not doing that, and you're just at someone else's kind of whim, even if they're quite good, it isn't the same thing. But I'm not sure that was enough. Like, back then, I was basically going through kind of like pangs of, like, did I do the right thing? Should I have just held on to it? I think you always feel that when you sell something, because it's essentially your baby, and so you question it. Maybe not the first month or two, but over time. And the best way to kind of get over that is to start something else. And so that's kind of what I did. And so I started actually 3 different companies back then. And one was just much better than the other. And so I kept doing that.
Yeah. And for most people that I've talked to about this, because I think it's an interesting question. And for me, it was all about freedom, right? And having that ability to kind of control your own destiny. But it's also the most interesting thing, actually, just creating something that didn't exist and seeing it like come to life.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So creating something that doesn't exist is just interesting in general, right? Like, so a book or any type of work of art or creation is interesting. But entrepreneurship, and I've written a children's book that's probably no good, but entrepreneurship is different in the sense that you can get multiple people kind of all going in the same direction towards some goal. And so what you can take on can be big, and of course it can be rewarding monetarily too. So it has, obviously, a book or a creative work could too, but probably not for me. In the sense of the odds of any given book hitting it is relatively low. And my background by then was having successfully created and sold a company, so it was natural to kind of want to do it again. And it was only really seeing something start to develop that it made me kind of, okay, I'm glad I sold that first one.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And if you don't mind, I think it'd be helpful too to describe some of the first couple companies, and then what then led you to starting my yearbook, and then which became the Meet Group. I think it'd be helpful to, because you've kind of you transitioned into kind of this, what I would consider one of the fastest and most popular industries over the last 10 years, which is social entertainment and live streaming. So how did you see that coming? And what was that transition from the companies that you started to then moving into this new direction? And was there clear signs that this was going to be the future? And this is what, because obviously right now, live streaming and virtual like that it is because of the pandemic, but it was going in this direction anyway.
Right.
So how did you see this coming, and how did you see this trend starting to unfold to start really capturing it with your first couple companies?
Yeah. So, my very first company was an editing business of various documents, resumes. We were the resume writing expert for Hot Jobs and the Career Journal, the Wall Street Journal site. We helped with personal statements, things like that. After I sold that company, that was Essay Edge and Resume Edge. After I sold that company, then I started Insider Guides, which was going to be kind of an insider's perspective, student written guidebooks, instead of like college guidebooks, which were kind of institutionally written at the time. I was going to do an art business, which I ended up doing, but then selling relatively little. Well, it was small. And then my yearbook. And my yearbook was a social network for meeting new people. And so those were the companies. Fast forwarding all the way to 2016, I had sold my yearbook, but then I had come back into that company. I'd sold my yearbook to a small public company. Then about a year later, I came back into that company as a CEO, and then renamed my yearbook to MeetMe. But live streaming really started to kick off for me probably late 2015 and Q1 16, when I was spending a fair amount of time in China. And so I saw Momo and YY, talked to executives there firsthand, played with the product in my hand. And it's bizarre, right? Like back in 2015, 2016, I actually didn't get it. I thought, okay, this feels something like it. Maybe it obviously works here, but it's not going to work in the US. But the reason I wanted it to work was because Momo looks a lot like MeetMe. in every other regard. So Momo had added live streaming into a kind of open chat based dating app, flirting, meeting, dating app, and so I wanted it to work. So I started from a premise of it's worked here, but it took me a couple months to really understand how it connected to dating. And then it was obvious, and now it's straightforward. But you have to kind of release yourself from the fact that people are coming to dating apps just for wanting to find someone to meet up with, in person. Maybe they're just seeking connection and they're lonely, and so this could be a perfectly good avenue for them. And so I basically put most of the company on it in 2016 to build it, and then we launched the product in Q1 of 17, but without any monetization. And then over the next couple quarters, we built the gifting engine, and then in Q3 of 17, we built that, and then in the period launched that, and in the period of the next 3 years, it would build up to a 200 million run rate revenue stream, all off of gifting. But I would say another aspect of at the time was my sense that it was going to be difficult to exit the company without that. so like my sense was that the business was too heavy on advertising. That's where we were making most of our money. I didn't believe our users were going to pay for subscription. So I didn't feel like that was a valid avenue. And I'm seeing this work in China. And it was IAP oriented. And so I thought, that could work. That could work here, and it would diversify us. And if it didn't work, clearly, I just didn't believe those teams were better served working on the core, right? Like I felt like advertising was kind of at basically a high watermark, and it was. So in 2016, Q4 16 was our advertising high water. CPMs were great. Over the next 5 years, what happened was that the duopoly, Facebook, Google, kind of now increasingly Amazon, just take so many impressions that programmatic exchanges can't really compete, and CPMs dropped, and we saw that really clearly in 17 and 18. So we basically had built the life raft at the right moment, but not necessarily. It was all connected, but we didn't build live video as a life raft. We had thought it would help us get acquired, because we felt like the acquirers in the space kind of poo-pooed advertising revenue. They didn't value it in the same way.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and I think a lot of things are shifting to that and some sort of subscription model, right? Is that how you see things going too? Is there's maybe a few players, in the advertising game, and then almost every other business is gonna need to have some sort of subscription business of some sorts, whether that's SaaS or membership or something like that. Is that how you're seeing things going?
Yeah, I mean, I think ads will always have some place. Like they could be rewards based ads, maybe for virtual currency. They could be offers of that ilk. But yeah, in terms of where I see growth, I see it exactly like you say on IAP, like freemium sort of one-off purchases, and then also on subscription. And one of the things we're now looking at is a subscription model for our streamers, so they can so you can subscribe to individual streamers, have a few different subscriptions, Twitch like.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I think that type of like kind of paid content for some influencers is going to be big. I'm curious now. I'd like to start talking about you've been acquired, right, with the companies that you started, but with the Meet Group, you've also acquired several companies. What was that, being on the other side of the table now? What was that thought process like?
Yeah, so That was very intentional. So basically, and it was all tied to live video. So we put the whole company on building live video out, and we felt like that was really important because like we weren't basically saying, okay, let's put a team on launching something really flimsy and let's see if there's any interest. We basically just like, let's go whole hog. There isn't anything else. There's just live video, and that's what we did. And that went that went pretty well because what that forced us to do was think through the whole thing, like including moderation. Moderation of live video is obviously a big problem. And so, you know, we spent a lot of time trying to get the moderation right. And when you're all in on something like we were, it doesn't matter if you double down or triple down, right? So we said, well, look, if we're going to build all of this, it would be helpful to have more audience. And so where can we get more audience? And acquisition, because we were a public company, acquisition was a reasonable path for us. You know, we felt like we had a lot of money raising capacity, and so we did. We raised a couple $100 million and we bought three competitors. But we all bought it. We bought them with the main point of wrapping it with our live streaming solution. And in each case, it worked. It turned on 40 to 80% of that app's revenue.
Yeah, that's really wild. Are you? I'm curious now how you're looking at, some of these new platforms, especially Clubhouse being kind of basically live streaming audio, essentially, and on-demand networking in a sense. I mean, it's a very interesting new. Like I look at it kind of as a feature rather than an app in of itself. I'm sure they're going to be adding other things into it. But when I first saw Rooms a few months ago and got into it, I was like, we need to have this on Entre. And I guarantee almost every other app is going to have a Rooms-like feature, just like Stories, because it just makes sense. It's something that I looked at it as kind of a no-brainer that this is social networking 2.0, 3.0, whatever we're on now. But I was like, this is instant on-demand connection in a more casual way that doesn't involve video, so people can do it while doing other things. Being in kind of this space, I mean, the yearbook, social network for meeting new people, and you've had these dating companies, and I've actually seen some people like with dating rooms and stuff on Clubhouse. How do you look at kind of what they're doing, audio, in this whole Rooms feature or concept that they kind of started, but other platforms like I know Facebook, and they rolled out Rooms on Facebook and WhatsApp. Discord rolled out Rooms. Twitter's testing Twitter Spaces. What do you see? Kind of a lot of other platforms having this as well, and how do you look at Clubhouse and what they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think Clubhouse is super interesting, and I think they're doing a lot of things right. I think that you will see audio. What Clubhouse is, and it's this trend I think that's coming everywhere, is that people don't want to just push content out to a platform like a post and get some comments and some likes on it. That feels 1.0-y, and they want an interactive sort of experience. And you're even seeing this in text-based apps, right? Like with what's that app? It's a relatively recent one. It's on my phone, but it's Honk, right? And so like,
yeah.
rather than having to wait for you to hit submit on your text, I get to see every character you're typing, including the typos, right? And like that actually all makes sense in the sense that people want presence. They want to feel connected, and live video, of course, does that. Live audio does it too. And live audio has the benefit of you're not having to yourself be performative visually, right? So you don't have to have a good background and worry about what you're wearing or what your face looks like. And I think that there a lot of times companies what really makes the company work is the format. So Clubhouse hit on a new format that allows a certain class of creator who may not be as popular on Twitter or wherever to potentially create content that's really interesting to some people and to get this creator sense that others may have already enjoyed on platforms like TikTok and Instagram. And TikTok's frankly another example of that, like creating a content format that allows, let's say a particularly attractive and somebody who can dance well. Those people do pretty well on TikTok. And so, maybe somebody who's interesting and can talk reasonably well and is well read can have a Clubhouse and even, and do well. So I think they hit on something really interesting in terms of how present will it be in every product set. I think the jury's out. I think I'm super interested in how they come up and think about monetization of it, because live streaming video has the benefit of the screen in the sense that people are actually watching the screen. And when you receive a gift from a viewer, you're receiving a gift because they want your attention. And you're giving it to them because you're looking at the screen. In audio, if your speaker isn't looking at the screen, and they may not be, then how do they react to the gift? Who do they know gave it to you? How do they express gratitude? In the live streaming video sense, that expression of gratitude is everything. If you don't say thank you and a big thank you for a good sized gift, you're not getting another one, right? And so how will that work in Clubhouse? I don't know. I think it could be interesting. I'm sure it could work, and I think there's plenty of ways you could monetize Clubhouse. But I think tipping will be an interesting one, because I think it is the lowest friction way to monetize it. But it will change the nature of the conversations, right? And if the algorithm is promoting, as it should, is promoting monetizable streams above other streams, then do you want to be in a stream where someone's asking you for tips, right? Or gifts or whatever the form is that it takes. So, I think it can be done well, and based on how thoughtful everything else on Clubhouse is, I would assume that it will be done well. But it's not a slam dunk from my perspective. But Facebook, Twitter, and everybody else that's adding it, I don't think it's the same. Like I think I don't go to Facebook or Twitter to listen. I think many people do, and I think that it might need a separate space. If Facebook might be better off creating its own spaces for this. I think they had one earlier this year for like group either video or audio. But I think you'll see kind of I think you'll see so much innovation now that Clubhouse is out there, that there will be others at like Twitter who kind of more or less copy it, and then there'll be others who kind of apply it to different verticals and use cases and try to unbundle Clubhouse. And I think that's probably right. That's going to be an exciting time.
Yeah, exactly. It would definitely be interesting. I'm enjoying it. I mean, I think we're working on some interesting similar features to add into our platform, because I think on demand and virtual networking is doing it right. Whoever does that right is going to win. And we're more focused on the business side of things, but I think it's going to be interesting. And it seems like a lot of the people who like it are the entrepreneurs, because they're trying to network and meet people. So
right.
It'll be cool. I'm curious what you think. You brought up TikTok. I know you spent some time in China too. So I'm curious what you think about that before we kind of wrap up here and stuff too, because that's honestly, the number one social platform right now, pretty much, if you look at the numbers.
Yeah. No, I mean, I actually visited, it was probably 2018, but I actually visited ByteDance. And, I was expecting, I don't know what I was expecting because it's TikTok. I was expecting probably this gleaming, office complex. But it wasn't. It was kind of, it could have been selling widgets back in 2018 anyway. And, I mean, TikTok is phenomenal at what it does. I think Eugene Wei called it algorithm friendly design. And I think that's right. That it gets so much feedback. Its algorithms are just so tuned that it can get you in a relatively quick onboarding session more content that you'll want to see. I do think it's often lowest common denominator content, right? Like I think I think Eugene Wei, in a similar vein, has called it a sorting hat, and I tend to have a different view of that. Like, sorting hat makes it seem very fun, and wouldn't it be nice if we could just avoid all of the problems of social media by putting everybody in their houses and not letting them talk to each other, right? And I don't think that really tends to solve many long-term problems. I think that probably creates more. It's just increasing, balkanization of, increasing silos. Some of those, sorting hat, they're sorting you into cesspools, for a lot of people. And then who can even define what the cesspool is? Nobody. It's based on some neural network that is incomprehensible in principle. So I think TikTok is perfectly amazing product, extremely well done, but is just additional, it's Facebook and Instagram on steroids. It takes all the problems of social media. I don't think it solves any of them. And whereas something that's more real time, Clubhouse is a different feel. But I think as time goes on and you go from, I don't know how many actives are on Clubhouse a day, I would have to assume 100,000 or certainly less than a couple 100,000 or less than a few 100,000, I would guess. But I'm sure that number will be 10x that, or maybe even 100x that. When that happens, what are the conversations like, right? I've had very few bad Clubhouse experiences, but there's been a few where it's because ultimately there's personalities. And it's not included me, but I've seen it just in others, people relating to each other.
Sure. And I think it depends on the individual, right? Like, the majority of people that I send an invite to for Clubhouse, they don't even go on it ever. They don't like it at all. But the ones who do are on it all the time. So
that's right.
It will be interesting. I think similarly with TikTok, I think TikTok, like you said, is kind of the ultimate just addiction, social media
right.
addiction machine. Like they however they did it, it was the perfect, it's what Facebook has been trying to do since its inception, basically. Right. So, it is fascinating. I'm curious real quick too, what you think. I don't know if you watched this.
I think somebody in the royal family called it the weaponization of social media. And that's kind of how I think of it. It's they do everything perfectly well that can get you hooked to a product, right?
Right. And I'm curious too. I don't know if you've seen The Social Dilemma, or what your thoughts around the social media addiction for especially the next generation, like your kids, or these teenagers and kids who are growing up with this stuff. It's going to be interesting. I'm not sure what the effects of it are going to be. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that too, real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fracturing of it. I'm generally negative on it for developing kids. It seems like as bad as it is for an adult, it's much worse for
Yeah.
a developing kid. And I have, a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 14-year-old, and none of them have phones, right? And so like even the 14-year-old, and she reads a lot, and she does art, and so like we'd certainly as a family foster that, and at the same time, of course, run social media companies. So it's a difficult thing, and even I don't think audio buys you out of them either. So you basically say like, okay, yeah, you may get rid of some screen time, but you may not. You may just fill all the moments that would otherwise you'd be working out with, Spotify in your ear, with Clubhouse in your ear instead. And so I think the main effect is just decreased attention span. Like it's hard for people to really just focus on anything for 2 or 3 hours, but when they do, they feel great. And like I think it's hard for you to say, well, just solve that with education, teach children better. When there's hundreds of billions of dollars of research going into knowing exactly what you're interested in and what will attract your attention, and tuning an algorithm just to distract you, right? So
exactly,
it's tough.
Yeah, it is tricky, and I think there's actually going to be startups that come out to help people like prevent that, and there's a lot of mental health things coming out now too. Which
China is banning.
Will be fascinating.
China's doing some interesting stuff with video games, because video games in the same way, are addictive, and they're basically requiring screen time limits based on age group. But of course, people get around them, even in China, right? They get a fake ID and use somebody else's limit,
Sure. Yeah, it's one of those things that if you limit it, then they want to do it more even.
Right.
So, it's going to be an interesting, it will be interesting to see how everything plays out. But
there is a beauty to it though, too, right? It's not all just bad, because I do think there's a connectedness.
100%.
You make relationships that you wouldn't have made. I wouldn't have met you, for example. And some of those relationships may well blossom, right? They may become business partners. They could become romantic partners. In the case of, you can imagine that. You certainly see some of that on Clubhouse. And it's hard to say that's a bad thing. Of course it isn't.
100%. Especially right now, it's the only way most people can interact with other human beings right now is through technology, which is a shame, but it is what it is. And if we didn't have, we've gotten so many connections and, met so many people through TikTok and Clubhouse and Instagram, it's changed a lot. And I know a lot of people, they are interacting through their friends through video games and stuff right now. So
the whole introvert extrovert thing is really interesting too, right? Like, because like you might think in an extrovert is frequently putting themselves out there to have social interactions, whereas an introvert is not. But something like a Clubhouse, or frankly, we see it on our live streaming platforms too. It is kind of like an introvert's paradise, right? Because even though you're being very interactive with people and you're talking to them and you're responding, you're doing it kind of on your terms and on your time, and you're setting aside time for it. And so it just, like I've seen, certainly we see some of our top streamers describe themselves as like shy, but when you put the camera in front of them and, they're the top streamer on the service, right?
It's so funny. Yeah.
Right.
I think it's the feeling of not having to physically be around a lot of people that lets people act that way. It is funny. There's been a lot of introverts that I've met that they've openly expressed that on Clubhouse and stuff, that it's like given them a way to be outgoing, but that they've never had before. So as we wrap up here, Geoff, I'd love for you to share any final piece of advice for entrepreneurs, whether that be, on starting companies or raising capital or, working with investors or finding partners, co-founders, whatever you'd like to share. And then what's the best place for people to learn more about you, connect with you, and all of that as well?
Sure. I think a piece of advice, when you're looking for, and I've written a little bit about this on Medium, under Geoff Cook, GEO.Cook. But when it's very difficult to necessarily find investors that have temperaments that match what you want, and you have to think of your investor as kind of a marriage, but it's even kind of more than that, because often like divorce isn't even a possibility, right? Like there's no potential way to do that in some cases, and so I think I tend to look for a diplomatic investor. Like obviously the best would be somebody that you can trust their loyalty, right? Like that's number one. But if you can't get that, and the dynamic may not be that you can, then a diplomat, somebody who might be able to bridge whatever the issue is that's creating tension, is important, because obviously when you're the board could and the investor probably sit on the board. The board, when it votes to get rid of you, you won't be in the room, right? And so you want somebody who might be able to reach that faction. And my own experience is that in dealing with investors, sometimes public investors, sometimes private, there's so many different times when people want to get rid of you, right? Right? Like when you're running a company, so many things go wrong that it's so easy to be like, well, I wonder if it's him, right? And so you need at least somebody to explain that it isn't, or maybe it is, but how to solve it.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think boards are under, like, especially early stage entrepreneurs aren't really thought of that deeply. And I think they're one of the most important things in the company. That's why I've been very careful about boards and stuff. But Geoff, as we wrap up, where's the best place for people to follow up with you? Twitter, Medium, what's the best place?
Twitter's fine. Geoff Cook at Geoff Cook, GeoffCook. Same username on Clubhouse too.
Fantastic. Well, we'll have to have a follow up. There's so much more that we could talk about, and I think this was incredible. Thanks so much for spending the time with us, and I'm sure a lot of people got a lot of great tips and interesting stuff out of this.
Cool. Well, thank you for having me. Take care.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of The Entrepreneur Show. If you'd like to connect and network with other like-minded people, entrepreneurs, investors, freelancers, and startups, check out our app or go to our website, joinentre.com. Thank you so much for being a part of our community. If there's anything that we can do to help you, please reach out to us and let us know.